Hi folks, my name is Khadine. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Advocacy and Intergovernmental Affairs Director here at the ACLU of Illinois. This weekend, President Trump announced his nomination for the Supreme Court vacancy created by Justice Ginsburg's death. Since then, many of us have been getting questions about what this means for reproductive rights, health, and access in Illinois. In response, we've organized this Reaper Rights pop-up to create a space to answer some of those questions, give the lay of the land, and highlight what else we can do in Illinois. You can submit questions during the conversation by putting them in the chat or email events@aclu-il.org. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. Unfortunately, we won't have live captioning available at tonight's event. Our sincerest apologies for any issues this may have caused. The program will be recorded and the recording will have closed captioning, and you could look for it on our website and our YouTube channel by early next week. At different points during tonight's event, you'll see links from Chelsea. If you see a link from Chelsea, it's like a gem. So please click on it to get more information about whatever it is we're talking about. So let's get started with a huge thank you to our panelists for making time to be here with such short notice. We are joined by 4 badass women who have used their seats at various tables, created their own tables, and maybe strategically flipped over a couple of tables to increase reproductive rights, health, and access. We have Ann Caprara, Chief of Staff for Governor J.B. Pritzker. We have Representative Kelly Cassidy, Illinois State Rep for the 14th District. And we have Ameri Klafeta, ACLU of Illinois Women's and Reproductive Rights Project Director. Welcome. Bios are in the chat. For panelists, when I ask your first question, feel free to briefly introduce yourself if you want to say more about you. So we have lots to cover. I'm sure you have lots to say. So there may be times where I will lovingly interrupt you so we can get to as many questions as possible. So people are scared about the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, a nominee coming from Donald Trump, who said he would only nominate justices committed to overturning Roe versus Wade. What's your reaction to the nomination? And for Rep. Cassidy, starting with you, what concerns are you hearing from constituents?
Well, as the lead sponsor of the Reproductive Health Act, I've certainly been hearing from a lot of people since the justice's death, because we did hear that promise from Trump that he would only nominate someone who would be willing to overturn Roe. To be honest with you, I'm hearing from a lot of other folks too, because so much else is at risk here. I'm hearing from folks who are concerned about their access to healthcare. I'm hearing from folks who are concerned about immigration issues, because everything is at stake at this point. But again, having sponsored the RHA, a lot of folks are coming to me asking, what do we need to do? What's next? How do we protect choice in Illinois? And the good news is that we've done a lot of what we needed to do. And thanks to the governor's team, we were able to, what we described as, build a firewall around Illinois, so that when Roe falls, and I've, long time ago, I used to say if Roe falls. And for the last few years, I've been saying when. When Roe falls, we will be able to protect folks' rights here in Illinois. Our situation isn't perfect. We've still got some more work to be done. I'm looking forward to repealing the Parental Notice of Abortion Act, but we are in relatively good shape here in Illinois. We have lots of border folks who are looking to us as a safe haven as well.
And can you share a little bit about the administration's concerns and your own reaction to the nomination?
Sure, and thanks, Khadine and the ACLU for having me tonight. I will say my first response was despair. I called the governor to give him the news, and I think we just both sat there silently for a full minute before, and he just, his words aren't for polite company, but there was an immediate reaction there. And I think, to just echo what Kelly said, for the anti-choice crowd, they have been preparing literally for years to get a case in front of the Supreme Court with the right makeup of justices to overturn Roe versus Wade. And I think for many of us who have worked in the choice community, I started my career at Emily's List. That was kind of how I got into politics. We feel like we've been screaming this to people for decades, really, that this was going to happen, that this was kind of the long-term plan. And this strange confluence of events that has really led to it playing out in the last 30 days of a presidential election in such dramatic fashion, I don't think I ever thought in my head that it would look like this. I've worked in states all over the country, and I will say Illinois more than any other place I've ever been, and that is thanks to the incredible work of the pro-choice caucus here inside the House and the Senate, and all the amazing women, including Representative Cassidy and others, had really anticipated this. It said, okay, we have to make sure the laws are set up in such a way that if this happens, women in Illinois are not going to immediately lose their ability to have, reproductive choice and healthcare. And Khadine, I mean, honestly, you were in my office, I think April of 2019. We were sitting around a table in my office, and you were like, look, here's the bill we're going to run, and here's why we're going to run it. And, I think it was great. We have a community of women in our office who really have a lot of literacy in the choice community and reproductive justice. So it wasn't, we didn't have to have any explanation of why we needed to be supportive of this. But it is frightening to me that really states are going to end up having to be the backstop for what is potentially going to happen on the court. And I think we can't underestimate how important that work is on a state-by-state level. I'm Melinda.
Thank you.
Sorry to be so late.
Oh, all good. So welcome, Senator Melinda Bush, and Chelsea will drop your bio in the chat. And we were just getting started about people's reactions to the nomination. So we'll go to Ameri and then come back to you. So Ameri, what were your concerns, both as someone who litigates these issues, and what have you been hearing from the provider community?
Sure. And first, thanks to everybody who's joined us tonight. This isn't exactly a surprise. As Representative Cassidy said, Trump said he was going to put justices on the bench who would overturn Roe. So this isn't that much of a surprise. The providers that I talked to in the course of my work, they've been on the front lines of these fights for a long time. So they're used to the uncertainty and they're used to the risk, but they're very worried about their patients. They see a lot of people already who come from outside Illinois, who live in places where it's already very difficult for them to access care. And I think they worry about what's going to happen to those people. And it's fitting that we're talking about this tonight because tomorrow is the anniversary of the Hyde Amendment, which restricts federal funding, including Medicaid funding for people who need abortion care. And that's one of the very practical barriers that people have to overcome if they're not in Illinois, which has a lot of protections. So I think the provider community is very worried about what happens to folks like that.
And Senator Bush, do you want to share your reaction to the nomination and what you've been hearing from constituents?
Yeah. I have to say my first thoughts were really, they harken back to when Representative Cassidy and I walked out of the Capitol and led the handmaids out to speak. And we knew at that moment that it was, just a moment really of foreboding of what we thought might come. But I just don't think anybody ever believed we would really, really be where we are. Every woman that I talk to is terrified, is scared, cannot believe that this is where we are. Look, I think we're going to have to talk about, do we put a firewall up as far as, loading the Supreme Court after Biden gets elected? Please pray whomever you pray or whatever you pray to. I went to the handmaids did an event in at the Federal Plaza, and ran into certainly Terry Cosgrove there and other people that have worked so hard in this arena, and it really was almost depressing, right? It's very, very difficult to find hope right now. We know that we have protected a woman's right to choose in the state of Illinois. We know that we've done that work, but how are we going to continue and maybe help other states? And what are we going to do as we see the numbers continue to climb, women that are going to come here, for their reproductive health care? How are we going to deal with that? Look, we really have to be talking about how we're going to move forward, what we're going to do to really stand up, because I think everybody is truly afraid this is going to happen. I'm sorry, you all know I have the potty mouth of the century, this batshit woman that has the unmitigated gall to be using her initials and calling herself the notorious whatever the heck. It's a very scary time, but I think it's a time for us to really understand, though, what we did in Illinois. Because,
I think,
yeah.
Senator Bush, just to interrupt you for that, I think
Yep.
one of the most asked questions on this issue is what happens in Illinois, well, generally what happens if the Supreme Court overturns Roe, and for people in Illinois, what protections would remain in Illinois? Would folks still be able to access reproductive health care, including abortions, birth control, and the morning after pill? And Rep. Cassidy, you and Senator Bush were the sponsors of the Reproductive Health and Access Act. This was, which is now law. And can you probably start by talking about the RHA and what protections it provides, Rep. Cassidy?
Yep. So go ahead, Kelly.
So the answer to all of Khadine's questions is yes, in Illinois. It establishes a fundamental right to access to reproductive health care for people in Illinois. And that means that, you know, while we fully anticipate that, you know, states all around us are going to start passing all the restrictions that we've been fighting off for years, those will not be able to affect us. Federal law as well. It won't, they will not be able to affect us. And that's great. And, you know, as Terry has pointed out, we need to make sure that we extend those protections to teen girls. So I'm committing here today that's, you know, our work isn't done. We are going to work on and pass the repeal of the Parental Notice Act. But truly, but the reality, and I think Khadine, you and I have talked about this in the past, and Melinda, you as well, you know, people hear things happening either at the federal level or in other states, and they think that it's happening here. They don't necessarily know that it's not happening here. And so there's this chilling effect that will occur for access as well for folks who are going to believe that they've lost access. And so they may not seek care. And so I think that we also maintain responsibility to ensure that we are constantly communicating and making sure that folks understand that your rights here in Illinois are safe.
Yeah, and if folks look at the chat, Chelsea has dropped a couple of links to documents that explains what the RHA does and frequently asked questions. So we encourage people to circulate that around. And this effort was definitely a coalition effort by organizations who throughout the state and individuals who really pushed hard to move that legislation. Senator Bush, can you talk a bit about the urgency of why we decided to move the legislation when we did, especially in light of a lot of legislators who asked the question, who said, you know, we just did House Bill 40, Medicaid access. Why do you need to do this now? Can you share a bit of the urgency of that moment?
Yeah, so I would say today is the results of that moment, what we were talking about then. So we really felt that with what was going on throughout the country, there were states that were passing some of the most restrictive anti-choice bills that we had seen since the 70s, really. And they were, you know, taking hold. Obviously, there was a real fight going on. We really knew that this was a moment in time that we needed to make sure we move something forward now. We have a president who's made his position clear. And we felt it was so important. You know, this also protects women, as you said. Contraception requires an insurance pays for contraception, for cervical cancer screenings, breast cancer screenings. Those are really important things too. But we really felt that moment with what was going on across the country, that Illinois, we wanted to be clear. We wanted to make sure that we were communicating that we believe in a woman. We believe in her right to make her own, his or her rights to make their own reproductive health choices. And the time was obviously right to do that. I am so grateful we did that. But it is really clear that, I mean, today, obviously, what we did, I mean, I'm so grateful. I am so grateful because there were so many people, as you said, Khadine, that said we just passed HB 40. That we've got, you know, we've got that in place and that we don't need to do anything else. Those will be the same voices that will tell us today, you know, that we don't need to move forward on the Parental Notice Act. And we do. We need to move forward on that. I hope we're going to do it in veto. But, you know, it was because of everything going on. We knew how real it was. And boy, but we could never have predicted how real it is in this moment.
And
it certainly did feel like we were, being accused of crying wolf then, definitely.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, many of our colleagues felt that way.
And can you share some of the steps that this administration has taken to not just preserve, but expand access to reproductive health, and share a little bit about why this has been so important for this administration?
Sure. Well, I'd actually like to take a step back and just talk about, I think one of the things that folks haven't realized over the last 15 to 20 years in other states, what the anti-choice community has done, which is to go in and they would approach Democratic legislators, moderate legislators, and they would say, oh, we know you're pro-choice, but wouldn't you agree that, you shouldn't have abortions after a certain place in your term? And wouldn't you agree that, it's just common sense that there should be a 48-hour waiting period? And wouldn't you agree that a woman should have to see an ultrasound before she, and they would couch these items and these really hey, I'm just trying to be reasonable. I'm not trying to attack choice, but I'm just saying, can't we all agree on these things? And what unfortunately happened, and I think Melinda and Kelly have kind of described this in the conversations you have with some legislators too, is this sense of choice isn't really under attack. We can all agree that these reasonable things should happen. But really what that was an incredibly smart anti-choice strategy to chip away at these rights so that we could come to this point and things would be as precarious as they are. So I think the first thing inside the governor's office, just to help folks understand, is you have a governor who, one of my favorite things we did during the campaign, he has a picture of himself marching in the 1990s for choice in DC. He's got his very bad suit on and a sign for Planned Parenthood, I think. And, you really do have somebody who believes this to his core. And then has surrounded himself with people, and a lot of women, frankly, of all backgrounds and ethnicities and genders and, worldviews, who believe in this ardently as well. I mean, we're very fortunate in that, we don't really exist in a state that has the kind of restrictions that you could see in a Missouri or a Mississippi, or even in a Pennsylvania. And so for us, it's really just about being supportive of what the legislature is doing, and making sure that we're following through. A lot of this access comes through services that we provide to citizens in Illinois, whether it's through HFS or Sol Flores, who I know a lot of you know and love, who oversees Health and Human Services for the governor, is another huge pro-choice advocate. So we have at every point tried to see how we can not just make this easily accessible for the people and the women of Illinois, but also to the point made earlier that we are going to have folks coming from other states who are going to see Illinois as the beacon in the Midwest where they can, get access to safe reproductive health care. And we understand how important that responsibility is, and how that has to be safeguarded at every turn by the governor's office. But, look, I think what has really been concerning to me is we've grown complacent. I mean, we just have, as a country, frankly, ladies, we have grown complacent. And white women, I'm looking at you from the last election, I had friends of mine, I went to school in suburban Philadelphia. They're all in that core swingable area of the Philly suburbs. And last Friday night, when Justice Ginsburg died, they're all texting me going, what can I do? And I'm thinking, well, there was shit you could have done 4 years ago, but welcome to the party. Here's where you need to give money. You need to vote. Here are the people you need to vote for. I mean, I think it's just, we really have to realize the moment we're in. I don't want to overplay it, but I don't want to underplay it either. And understand that we got to fight. I mean, this is not a time where you can sit back and think, well, things are just going to be fine. And, to the point about all the other things that the Supreme Court is going to potentially, we're looking at an ACA case, a healthcare case, the week after the election, which could mean people losing their healthcare going into the winter months of this pandemic. It means civil rights. There's already things that the court has stripped and efforts that we know Democrats and a new president would want to make that wouldn't stand in a 6-3 court. And then of course there's LGBTQA plus rights that, have been fought so hard for. And, now we're looking at a court that's going to be hostile to those things. So, I think just being vigilant on all those fronts and realizing that a lot of these fights are going to play out in the states and we have to be ready for them.
Great. Ameri, what are some of the issues coming to the court that could affect abortion rights? Can you kind of share with the folks who are listening?
Fit into context, people talk about the concern that the court might overturn Roe, and there are, various state laws that really are designed to go to the Supreme Court and be a direct challenge and a direct invitation to overturn Roe. So those are the states that passed abortion bans very early in pregnancy. There's a petition right now to ask the court to hear a case involving Mississippi's abortion ban. And those are the types of state laws that are really inviting a direct overturning of Roe. Then the second category of activity that we're seeing among the states are the things that Anne is talking about, the kind of chipping away. So earlier this year, the Supreme Court decided the June Medical Services case, which struck down a Louisiana law that required abortion providers to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of their clinic. That decision really turned on a very slender thread with Justice Roberts' concurrence, and there's really nothing stopping states from continuing to try to pass those and, push those through because the decision, was so narrow. Other things that we see are states trying to pass very biased counseling and calling it informed consent. We also see states trying to pass bans on D&E procedures, which effectively eliminates abortion after a certain point in pregnancy. So, those all go to a scenario where the court doesn't really overturn Roe, but continues to uphold these types of restrictions in a way that just shrinks access more and more. The good thing here in Illinois is that the RHA would prevent against all of those types of laws. The RHA makes it a fundamental right to access abortion care, and laws that attempt to restrict it have to be very, very narrowly tailored. They have to meet, the highest level of review by the court. They have to be, evidence-based and consistent with accepted medical practice. So the good news is that the RHA protects against that kind of thing, but those are the activities that we're seeing, and they're really designed to push the court.
And we have a question from Allison wanting to know if Congress can pass a federal abortion ban that would outlaw abortion in Illinois despite the RHA.
So Congress can, federal law can trump state law, but the other side of that is true. And there's been a federal bill called the Women's Health, I'm going to get it wrong, I think it's the Women's Health Protection Act. And that bill would do the opposite. It would get rid of this patchwork of state laws and, protect abortion rights nationwide so that your ability to get your health care that you need doesn't depend on where you live. So the opposite is also true, and we could look to Congress to protect these rights across the country.
Anything to the point of other states where they may not have the same kind of General Assembly we do or the same kind of governor that we do. We saw some folks from Georgia who came to the General Assembly in Illinois to say, you all could do it. What are you waiting for? We need you to do it. And the governor met with those folks, so did our sponsors, and they were looking to us. So I think a few of you mentioned, what about those other states? I think concrete things we can do is show up for them in the way that they showed up for us when we needed a push. There's a question from Shannon about whether or not the ACLU or partner organizations can put out social media messages they can share about access in Illinois. That is definitely something that we can do. So even with the passage of laws like the RHA and expansion of Medicaid coverage to include abortion care, those protections are sometimes not fully settled even while a bill is signed into law. And the threat, as some of you have talked about, isn't always from a Supreme Court decision. Sometimes it's a federal circuit court or state courts or the legislature or a change during an election. Can you all share some examples of attempts to undermine the protections we have in Illinois? because I think Anne's point about the vigilance and the idea of, oh, we're done. The RHA, House Bill 40, we're good to go. I think it's helpful for folks to know why it's important to be vigilant even in a state like Illinois. Rep. Cassidy or Senator Bush, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Rep. Cassidy take this because I believe they are in the House where they've introduced some of these measures.
Yeah. So to Anne's point from earlier, the last very real restriction threat that we had was when a more conservative Democrat listened to the wouldn't it be reasonable if, and we had an ultrasound mandate, and it was getting a lot more momentum than it should. It was being given a boost because of who the sponsor was. And many of us came together and pushed back and fought, introducing hostile amendments onto the mandate to try to weigh it down. Mine was the informed consent for Viagra, that if before someone could get a prescription for Viagra, they would have to watch a video of the treatment for priapism, or the mythical commercial of the 4-hour erection. But we did that both to draw attention to it and to show that we were going to fight this, that we weren't going to allow it to just get steamrolled through. Every year, I mean, I don't think the ink was dry on the governor's signature when members of my chamber started to introduce repeals. And yes, we have a Democratic supermajority. We have a pro-choice majority in the House, and that's wonderful. And that means that we are our own firewall in many ways. But, you know, we thought that when Joe Lyons ran the ultrasound bill, you know, those moments happen anyway. And if you aren't vigilant, they can continue to happen, even in a seemingly pro-choice chamber.
Ameri, can you share some of, go ahead.
I was going to note how, and I understand I'm speaking as somebody who works for a guy. I love him. I tell him I got him in under the wire at this point. But this really does speak to the importance of having women in elected office. And I say that because, to Kelly's point, oftentimes what will happen during the legislative process, I watched this happen in Congress when we were passing the Affordable Care Act. You know, we were down to the wire. I was working for a pro-choice Democratic woman who was in a Republican district in Colorado. There was a point where the Republicans were trying to make a deal with the leadership and the Obama administration around the Hyde Amendment and around choice issues and funding in government. And it was Patty Murray and it was Nancy Pelosi who stood there and said, absolutely not. And that wasn't a big floor debate. You know, that was in a room negotiating the bill behind the scenes. And I just want to go back to this thing that, like, the anti-choice crowd is smart. You know, they find the little weaknesses, the places where they can get, you know, carve out one little thing that, again, seems super reasonable. And then it just has this cascading effect. So, you know, having those people in the room where the decisions are getting made. And I watched the women in the legislature last session, you know, literally stand up and say, you're going to consider this bill and you're going to vote on it and we're going to pass it. And you know, and I don't really care what your problem is, and I don't care that you think it's not the right time, or, you know, that we need to wait a little bit longer, like it's happening now. And so, you know, I think those parts of the process, which I think sometimes get lost on people because they think, oh, you know, you pass this bill or you have this president or whatever it is, but there's so many chains and links along the way where something can snap and, you know, you suddenly bargained away something that's really important.
It's a great point. Ameri, can you share some of the things you've seen in the litigation context in terms of undermining the protections we have in Illinois?
Yes, so we've already seen a lawsuit filed challenging one part of the Reproductive Health Act. The Reproductive Health Act requires private insurance coverage of abortion care if the insurance policy also covers pregnancy-related care. And we've seen a challenge from a religious organization and also some private companies, a trucking company, a dentist, who challenged that provision. I think a lot of people who are joining us today are probably familiar with the Hobby Lobby case, where Hobby Lobby said it didn't have to provide birth control coverage for its employees. This lawsuit is along the same lines. It was not at all a surprise to us. We expected something like this. The Hobby Lobby case is not at all similar to the situation with the RHA, but that challenge is ongoing and the Attorney General's office is defending it. We also have seen a lawsuit filed against the Healthcare Right of Conscience Act amendments that were passed in 2016 that our office worked on. Those amendments make sure that if someone goes to a healthcare provider who's not providing them care because of a religious objection, that they still are able to get the information that they need so that they can go somewhere else and get treatment and they know what's going on. That challenge has been proceeding through the courts. It also is being defended by our Attorney General. Our office filed an amicus brief in support of it last fall, and just a few weeks ago, we got an order from the court short-circuiting the plaintiffs are crisis pregnancy centers, short-circuiting their attempt to, win the case without a trial. So the case is still proceeding. The court rejected the plaintiff's arguments, and we're following that one very closely as well. But it goes to this need to continue to be very vigilant, even after we get the law in place.
So when some of you started talking about this, so going from what's protected in Illinois, let's talk about what still has to be done and what needs to happen to ensure full access to reproductive health care access and coverage. Who would like to start? We talked some about the Parental Notice of Abortion Act repeal. What are the other things that we need to do in Illinois that's still left on our plate? Melinda?
Yeah, well, obviously the parental notice, I think that's really the big one. And I think you all know what that is and why that's important. It's obviously not everyone lives in a family or in a situation where they can talk to their parents about this. And many times those parents are abusers and sometimes may have even been the abuser who impregnated their child or a young person. I think we still want to make sure that we're, moving forward there. I know we're talking about that one. I don't know if actually I'm hoping that Ameri is going to be able to help us here. Are there things that we need to be tightening up? I guess this would be my question for you. I think, you did such a great job last year, year before, writing the RHA and making sure that, women are covered, that insurance pays, that they're all protected. But I'm asking you, are there other things we need to do this next year that we should be talking about early on in addition to, the Parental Notice Act?
I mean, if I could jump in there too, though, the beauty of the RHA is that foundational reproductive justice framework that we operate from. Yet we're a state with high rates of maternal mortality, in particular among women of color. We are a state that does not yet contemplate well what reproductive justice looks like in terms of what happens after you do choose to go forward with a pregnancy and bring a child into the world. Are we creating safe communities and quality schools and all of those things so that you can parent well? Are we are providing better access to childcare? So I think it's when we start to think about the spectrum that we find the holes that we have to keep plugging.
Yeah, just to add to what Kelly just said, I mean, when we first came into office 2 years ago, one of the big items on the governor's plate was renegotiating the AFSCME contract. And we were sitting down to go through everything. And the women of the office just kind of collectively, it was very odd, we all kind of came upon it at the same time. We're looking at the state's parental leave.
Oh no, you froze.
Anne is frozen, and let's give it a couple of seconds. And Ameri, do you want to add while we're waiting for Anne to unfreeze?
Yeah, and I do think we are talking about the parental leave, really trying to move that forward this year. I know it's something Kelly and I are both really interested in. I understand there's a lot more energy behind that bill this year. I hope so. That needs to happen.
Ameri, can you talk a little bit about religious refusals and how that's played out and why that's an important thing for us to do in Illinois to take care of.
So religious refusals are an area that we really focus a lot of energy on. Again, the issue of somebody who goes to a healthcare provider to get healthcare, sometimes they show up at an emergency room in an emergency and they don't get the care that they're seeking because the healthcare provider, the hospital system, has a religious objection to providing that care. So we do a lot of work with respect to that. One of the areas that we are continuing to focus on as well related to that is hospital mergers. So we've seen over the last several years a trend toward hospital systems merging, and sometimes these religious restrictions can follow the merger. Sometimes property is sold and they follow the property. So we're continuing to work on what we can do to raise awareness of this issue so that people know where they're going for their health care, and also to see what we can do as these mergers proceed to make sure that public health is still protected in that way. This issue of the overlap between reproductive rights and religious issues is one that the Supreme Court confronted in the last term as it considered another challenge to the birth control coverage mandate and the Affordable Care Act. In the upcoming term, the Supreme Court is hearing a case, I think in November, that involves issues of religious liberty. It's the city of Philadelphia has a policy of not placing foster care placements with agencies that deny placements because the people are in a same-sex relationship. So the Catholic Charities, I think, is sued, and that case is coming before the Supreme Court. So I think we'll continue to see a lot of attention from the court on this issue of the balance between religion and other civil liberties and civil rights.
Great. So this is, go ahead, Melinda.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so I understand too, the Supreme Court, it looks like they might be hearing something about the morning after pill and restrictions that would make it very, very difficult for us to do telehealth. Do you know anything about that?
I know that they have a petition. The one that I know about is not the morning after pill. The one that I know about is medication abortion. And there was recently a good order that during that we got out of a district court that during the public health crisis with COVID, the restriction that requires medication abortion to be done in person has been lifted so that they can be done via telehealth. And there's a petition pending to try to get that overturned.
Okay.
One I'm familiar with.
So, and I think, Kelly, you hit a little bit on this, but support for reproductive rights, health, and access isn't just limited to access to contraception and abortion. It's tied into other issues as well. If folks care about repro issues and they're here on this call again, can you talk a little bit about why they and other people in their community should also care about LGBTQ issues or criminal justice and policing reform or pushing for a living wage or paid sick leave?
I mean, I already kind of touched on it, but that is our reality. Both that this exists within a framework of reproductive justice and true equality, but also, quite frankly, my beloved siblings, the allyship that has gotten us here with communities of color, with labor, with other communities like the LGBTQ community, demands that we be there for them just as they have been there for us. And that's a piece that frankly, and I think, Melinda, you and I experienced this in the run up to the passage of the RHA, was some questions about whether the white women were going to be there for them when they needed us. And so I think that's hugely important that we recognize the power of that allyship, but what it truly means to be allies.
Great, and I think somebody may have highlighted it, but the fact that the RHA also deals with not just contraception, abortion, but maternity care. And the issue of maternal mortality is a huge issue that's affecting especially communities of color. And so all of these things are really important because sometimes your ability to survive after you've given birth can depend on your access to healthcare on the front end, your ability to have paid leave after. So definitely it is all connected. So access to reproductive health and rights can sometimes be seen as a partisan issue, and it can also sometimes be seen as a religious issue, even though folks who access this care come from all parties, all religions. And just even thinking through my time in Springfield for the last 10 years, when I first started, there were Republicans who were pro-choice, and for the RHA, the legislation was passed with just Democrats. So I guess I'll start with you, Senator Bush. Is choice a partisan issue? And I would argue it's not, but can you talk about what's the role of pro-choice Republicans in this work generally and in the moment that we're in right now?
Yeah, so I think we have to continue to reach out. I'll tell you what my experience was. I literally talked to every Republican when I was trying to pass this bill and doing the pre-work before it got to a vote, and literally set a meeting up with every one of them to talk about their position. And I also, talked to, sorry, I've got my little computer dinging here. Anyway, sorry about that. I also went to one of the Republicans and just said, basically, so, hey, are any of you guys over here pro-choice? Do you think there's any Republicans that are going to be willing to work with me? And he said to me, do you mean in the state or in the General Assembly? Right? And so I said, okay, got it. But when I did have conversations, I actually found two. That one who absolutely told me that he was pro-choice, another who told me that he was basically pro-choice. And so I think we need to do some work there. I do. I think we need to start talking to them about kind of coming out and being willing to talk about these issues, because frankly, I see it this way. The Republican Party is truly imploding, and they are so far to the right. And I think we have to have members that are really starting to see that and understanding that. You pointed it out, Khadine. It used to be, under George Bush, Title X, these people were pro-choice. They didn't believe it was the government's right to be involved in a woman's right to make these decisions. So I think we should be trying to find where those connections and agreements are, and find ways that we can build on them and find ways to work with them. So I think that's a challenge for both Kelly and myself. I think this next year, and I would say all of us, and we really do need to, as Kelly said pretty eloquently, we need to build those bridges outside of ourselves too. We understand that the Black and Brown communities, have been those communities that have mainly dealt with social justice issues, and frankly, so many times socioeconomic challenges where they weren't able to pay for their health care, and there's just so many issues. And I think we have to do a better job of bridging that gap and having those conversations. I know it's something I'm really interested in doing more of. I think we all know with Black Lives Matter, we are trying to listen more than we ever have as, people that grew up with white privilege to Black and Brown people and learn from them. So I really think it's just time for us to have more dialogue and figure out, look, they're really good at finding out where there are places that they can start breaking us apart. Let's figure out how we do that to them. And let's find those legislators that we think are willing to start having some of those conversations.
So, and welcome back. We've missed you. So can you talk, in addition to talking about the idea of pro-choice Republicans and what's their role in this work, can you also talk about the role of pro-choice religious folks? How can they be helpful? How have they been helpful in the past and moving forward?
Well, let me say this. When we're talking about, I think the conversation around Amy Coney Barrett has, the Republicans went to this knee-jerk, you're going against Catholicism. I'm a Catholic. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I sometimes think that the commentators out there have never met an American Catholic. We are an incredibly diverse group of people with very different interpretations of our faith. I do not care that Amy Coney Barrett is a Catholic. I do not care if she is a lovely person or a miserable person. I care that she is going to vote to repeal Roe versus Wade. I care that she is going to vote to take away people's health care. I care that she is going to vote against civil rights actions, and I care that she's going to vote to take away the protections that my LGBTQ plus A plus friends enjoy right now. That's what I care about. I don't care that she's Catholic. I think it's kind of irrelevant to the conversation. I grew up in a household of Republican pro-choice Catholics. When I was in 8th grade, my little parochial school used to take all the kids to DC for the pro-life march every year. And it was my parents, and at the time, because I was 12 and I thought it was just a field trip, they were the ones that were like, absolutely not, you're staying home, you are not going on this. And, you know, I was like, gosh, this is the end of the world. I'm going to be that kid that doesn't get on the bus for this thing. And years later, I actually wrote them a letter thanking them because, you know, first of all, way too young of an age to be making a decision about how I felt about this. But, you know, they really did kind of protect me and my siblings from influences that we're trying to kind of get in our brains at a very early time. And to Melinda's point, I do actually think there are a fair number of Republican pro-choice voters, legislators, elected officials. I think, unfortunately, the environment inside the Republican Party has made it almost impossible for those folks to come out, if you will, and talk about it and vote that way. And part of that is a systemic change that needs to happen. But look, I know we've talked a lot about where we kind of are, and I think there's a sense that we all have of inevitability about what might happen around the Supreme Court choice. I don't want us to be there quite yet, because I want people to realize what the next 30 days are going to look like. The earliest, even if they zoomed through every hearing, every step of the process, that this woman could stand in front of the Senate for a vote is the week before the election. Now, I have lived, breathed, and died a career on Capitol Hill. And I do not think I could possibly communicate to all the people on this phone what that spectacle is going to look like. There are going to be thousands of people in the streets. It is going to be impossible to walk anywhere in the Capitol without having somebody accost you. I do not believe that we know at this point in time what is going to happen. Does it look good? No. But, like, is it time to give up? No. It's time to get very loud. It is time to talk to your friends and colleagues and, you know, relatives who live in states who have a Republican senator who's either up for re-election in a month or is up for re-election in 2 years, and to start putting pressure on them. I hear a lot of these pundits out there right now, and I'm sure Kelly and Melinda will back me up on this, who are like, well, these folks know they're going to lose, so they don't care. There is no legislator alive who believes that they are going to lose until the minute that they are told that they have lost. So, you know, I really want to just say to everybody, don't give up. You know, don't throw in the towel right now. There are a lot of Republicans and independent voters out there, and every poll that we've seen has backed this up, who hate the way this process is taking shape, because it is becoming a character issue for people who said they wouldn't do this. I'm looking at you, Lindsey Graham. You know, this is going to be a real problem for Republicans. I believe that right now at the ballot box. And so we can't just presume at this moment in time that the fight is over, that, you know, we need to just give up and move on. I really do believe that we've got to lay it all out on the line. And I do think actually Democratic senators and leadership are there. They kind of understand the heat that exists in the Democratic Party at the moment, particularly amongst women. So I just think it's important, as we look to the political future of this, that we get much louder than we probably have ever been, and that we encourage all the people. I told my friends in Pennsylvania, I'm like, go to Pat Toomey's office and just stand outside. And, you know, and even if he doesn't show up, get the local news there and be the woman carrying your kid on TV being like, I don't want to see a Supreme Court justice chosen this way. That stuff matters. People watch that. So I do just believe, before we kind of say all is lost, like, that we've got to remember that politics is a very strange business. I never thought we'd be sitting here talking about President Donald Trump. So, you know, we don't really know what's going to happen. And my suggestion would be that nobody who cares about this spend the next month just moping around. I think it's time to, you know, get really, really loud and think about what you can do. You know, here in Illinois, we're not necessarily a battleground state, but you go cast your mail-in ballot and, you know, go make calls into Wisconsin or, you know, go do whatever you need to do in Michigan or Missouri and other places where potentially we might have a competitive race.
Sure.
So there are just all these things that are really, really.
The Minnesota Democrats reached out to my ward organization this week. They need help.
So I think, and I think you captured this.
Sorry, I know we're getting into the electoral.
The one thing that you would want people to take away from this discussion, I think, and you talked about being loud and not being in despair. So Rep. Cassidy, Ameri, and Senator Bush, quickly, what's the one thing you would want people to take away from today's conversation?
Fight like you've never fought before.
Thank
Really.
you.
Don't be polite.
Amen.
Demand, don't ask.
Yep. Hottest places in hell, as Dante say, are reserved for those who in moral crisis maintain their neutrality. We ain't neutral. We have a fight on our hands, and we have to stand up for ourselves. Women been doing it for themselves for years. We're going to do it again. We have to fight.
Ameri?
I'm going to say I've had a lot of people asking me, you know, the last couple of weeks, like, where is the hope? And if people are, you know, need something to get them, keep them going and give them a little optimism, you know, look at the work that Representative Cassidy did and Senator Bush. They went to Springfield to get the RHA done. They did. They're going to go back and get parental notice repealed. And I think that's the kind of action that we need to look at to give us some hope and keep going.
That's a good point, Ameri, because we were dead in the water, right? Like so many people, it's over. We're not going to pay. It's okay, maybe next year. And those amazing first-term women
Yep.
declared hell no. So you're absolutely right.
Yep. It matters who you send to office. It matters. Send more people that are willing to stand up and fight, that aren't afraid to fight for what they know is right. And that's what Illinois did. That's why we had those women that came and fought and said, hell no, we're not going home without passing the RHA. It's important. Make sure, I mean, that's the one thing, make sure you're helping someone get out there. Like Ann said, make phone calls, you know, reach out to other states. You know, if you have a tight race in your district where you're at, please make sure you're helping those people, obviously. But I got to tell you, I think we're going to be okay in Illinois right now. I'm worried about the rest of the country. So if you can help in some of those areas, do.
And I would say, and one, thank you all for being here. You all are just amazing examples of what badass women look like in all of the work that you do. So really appreciate it. And I would say, and some of you mentioned it, with the RHA, it was really difficult. Like, it wasn't an easy thing for us to do in Illinois. So while we may have these protections in place, getting them was really difficult. We needed a broad coalition. We needed leadership in our sponsors, supporters, and from the governor's office. So I hope everyone votes, make a plan to vote, make sure everybody in your community votes. We have 34 days until the election. I look forward to talking with you all again about criminal justice, policing, post-election, rolling up our sleeves and talking about the next steps, repealing P&A. So thank you so much for making the time. And it was great to see you. Thank you, folks who joined, and this will be recorded and available on our website. Thank you, folks.
Hey, and can I say too, Ann, thank you so much. Thanks to Governor Pritzker. He was with us the whole way on the RHA. Thank you.
Well, and to Khadine, who honestly has been an amazing advocate.
It's a coalition effort, so.
I know, but you came in and you were like, we're doing this.
Bye, everyone.
You know, bad when we see them. Love you guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye.